Help of Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Tes. We left off on Daf Tes Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. We are beginning to learn the sugya that Moisifin Mechoil al HaKodesh, that we have to add from the mundane and give that to the holy. This is going to be a concept that we apply both when it comes to Shemitah, as we'll explain today, that the various restrictions that apply on the year of Shemitah are not only for the year of Shemitah. They actually begin midoiraisa a bit before, as we'll explain, and they continue a bit afterwards. And similarly, that we are moisef mechoil lekodesh, we also apply to Yom Kippur, concerning fasting on Yom Kippur, that we don't begin the fast bein hashmashos, we begin the fast a little bit before bein hashmashos. Similarly, when Yom Kippur ends, we don't end it when it's really over, halachically, but we add a bit to the day. And the same thing is when it comes to Shabbos, and when it comes to Yom Tiv, to the Isur of Asiyas Melacha, always. You should, like people, candle lighting is 18 minutes before Shabbos. Not exactly. It's 18 minutes before the added time. It's really much, it's probably 22 minutes before bein hashmashos, candle lighting. Because 18 minutes, and then we add a few minutes in the beginning, and we add a few minutes at the end. We're going to have actually two sources for that. We're going to be learning a very important pasuk in Parshas Kisisei, as we learn it in Chitas. We're going to see here the Machlokes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael. We are going to have on Daf Tes Amud Beis another very important three-way Machlokes concerning Yovel. Now, we mentioned yesterday the 4 dinim of Yovel. Let's quickly recap them. We'll review them again when we learn the Gemara. Number 1 is we may not work the land. It's a very general statement. It's not exactly the way it sounds. Certain things may be done on Shemitah, may be done on Yovel, but it's correct to say that there is a general limitation, a big limitation of how much work we can do to the land. That's Yovel like Shemitah. But this Isur of working the land, as we will see, might be connected to 3 other dinim. There is a din of freeing the slaves. Freeing the slaves means if you owned a Jewish slave, as we have the dinim in Parshas Mishpatim, that he stole, really he should only be a slave for 6 years, but then he didn't want to go free, so they had his ear pierced, so then he stays until Yovel. That slave has to be freed on Yovel. That is true not only in Eretz Yisrael, but also if there is a Jewish slave anywhere in the world, they have to be set free. Ukarasim deroir ba'aretz, proclaim freedom upon the land, right? Liberty Bell, that's Yovel. There's another din that if you have land that is not your ancestral land, you didn't yashin it from your father, from his father, from when they divided it under Yehoshua, you bought it, that has to be relinquished, allowing it to go back to the original owner. And the other din is that there's a mitzvah on Beis Din to blow the shofar. So that's Isur to work the land, freedom for slaves, return of lands, blowing of the shofar. 3-way machlokes tanoim regarding the Isur of working the land. That Isur is contingent on either all 3 or one of the 3, meaning that if one of the 3 is not done, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yossi, then there won't be an Isur to work the land. Interesting. Shemitah, there's no such a thing. Shemitah, you can't work the lands. Nekuda. By Yovel, as we will see, according to one shita, if you don't free the slaves, then there's no Isur to work the lands. If you don't return the lands to the original owners, according to another opinion, then there's no Isur of working. There's going to be a linkage, and we'll see how they got each shita, how they learned psukim, and we will have to open up a chumash, which will be a great thing when we come to Tes Amud Beis. And towards the end of the daf, we're going to go back to the Mishnah on Daf Beis. One of the Rosh Hashanas that the Mishnah says that Echad B'Tishrei is a Rosh Hashanah is for Vilanetiyah, which means for saplings, for young trees. And that's connected to the law of Arla, to the law in Eretz Yisrael of Neter Voi, as we'll go through details, and ultimately it's going to be connected to, but not exactly to, the permissibility of eating the fruits, which will begin from Tu B'Shvat. So there is this crossover, this inconsistency, this complexity, which makes Torah so beautiful, that on one hand, Echad B'Tishrei is the Rosh Hashana for saplings. When we begin the count of Arla, when we go from we're year 1 to year 2 in Arla, from 2 to 3, but as we will see, It doesn't end by Echad B'Tishrei, at least not always. It's going to end only by Echad B'Shvat or by Tu B'Shvat and much, much more. Let us start on Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Again, we are up to 4 lines from the top of the Amid. How did we get to the Umaysifin Mechal Al HaKodesh? So we learned yesterday the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel Benoi Shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, that there's a pasuk. We're going to open up a chumash soon, but there is in Parshas Bahar, the Torah not once, twice says Yovel Hi Shnas HaChamishim. Yovel Hi. So what's the Yovel Hi? Since, according to Rabbi Shmuel Benoi Shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, the freedom of slaves is something that's gradual. Not like the Chachamim that say when they blow the shofar on Yom Kippur, the slaves go free. No, that's freedom begins from Rosh Hashana. And step number 1, then it culminates on Yom Kippur. So one might have thought that since generally there is a rule that we add from the mundane to holy, maybe the year of Yovel doesn't end Chavtas Elul. Maybe the laws of Yovel, or some of the laws of Yovel, go into the 51st year. Maybe. Until when? Until Yom Kippur. Then there's going to be a harmony, a symmetry, that it begins, there's something about from Rosh Hashana to Yom Kippur, and it really only ends next year Yom Kippur. You might have thought that, so that's why the Torah has to write, as we'll see later in verse 11, Yovel Hi Shnas HaChamishim, that all of the laws of the 50th year is only on the 50th, and nothing crosses over. So now the Gemara wants to know this concept that we add Mechoil Al HaKodesh, which is really, according to Hasidus, the purpose for why we are here. In other words, Hashem created the mundane world, and really what we are doing is 2 ways of wording it. Either we are bringing more Kedusha into the week, which is what we have to do, or we are elevating the mundane, elevating it up to the realm of Kedusha. That's the whole kavanah. That's the Dira Lo Yizbarach B'Tachtoinim. But Al Pinigla, where do we see that? Like in Shabbos is holy, God made it holy. God doesn't need us to make Shabbos holy. But our koyach is that we take the Kedusha of Shabbos and we bring it into the week. That we take the Kedusha of Shabbos and we bring it both prior and post. The Kedusha of Yom Kippur, prior and post. The Kedusha of Shemitah, prior and post. Where do we get that from? Minalan de Tanya. This is beautiful. We have a pasuk in Parshas Kisisa, the big Rashi over there in Chitas. Now let me just tell you how the pasuk begins. The pasuk begins with Shabbos. It says, Sheishes Yomim Tavoid, Ubayoim Hashvi'i Tishbois. That's clear. 6 days you should work, and then on the 7th day you rest, my friends. That's classic Shabbos. The same pasuk, Yakir, the same pasuk continues, Bechodesh Ubakotzer Tishbois. Same pasuk. From plowing, Charisha, from reaping, from gathering, you should rest. Now when you read the pasuk, what's not clear? The pasuk begins speaking about Shabbos. If the end of the same pasuk is also speaking about Shabbos, on Shabbos we may not do 39 melachos. Not only may we not plow and reap, there's another 37 things we can do. So why would the Torah specify 2 if we're speaking about Shabbos? And because of that, as Rashi doesn't quote the names. Rashi in Chitas, Rashi in Chumash says, Yesh Merabbi Seinu. Rabbi Akiva says the words Bechodesh Ubakotzer Tishbois is not talking about Shabbos. Even though it doesn't sound like it, it can't be talking about Shabbos, like we just explained. What is it talking about? Shemitah. Hold on. In other words, what does it say? It says that on the 7th day you rest, but on the 6 days you can work, you can do whatever you want. So says the Chumash, hold on the 7th year, even during the 6 days of the week, you also cannot do whatever you want. But during the Shemitah year, you can do other melachas. The only melacha that generally you can do on Shemitah is connected to Charisha and Ketzira working the field. That's what Rabbi Akiva learns. But hold on, Rabbi Akiva is not done yet. Rabbi Akiva says, if Bechodesh Ubakotzer Tishbois is speaking about that you cannot plow or reap on the Shemitah year, I don't need a pasuk. I already have a pasuk in Bahar. The Torah says, don't work the land. So this Bechodesh Ubakotzer Tishbois speaking about Shemitah, but it's telling you Tois v'Shmitah, adding a little bit before and adding a little bit afterwards. Rabbi Akiva Omer Einoi Tzarech Lomer Chodesh v'Kotzer Shel Shvi'is. It's amazing. Rabbi Akiva takes it for granted. It for sure is not speaking about Shabbos. That's a given. Even though the pasuk begins, Sheishes Yomim Tavoid Ubayom Hashvi'i Tishbois. It can't be because Shabbos, the Isur is on all Lamates Malachas. Shemitah. Can't be Shemitah proper because we don't need a pasuk here. Sharei Kvar Nemer, it says, Sotcha Lo Yisizra. Don't plant. Now I know that there's planting and there's plowing and there's reaping, it doesn't matter. Generally, don't work the land. So it must be, Ella says Rabbi Akiva, this is the source regarding Shemitah, Chadish Shel Erev Shvi'is, that the plowing that one might do before Shemitah. Now, let's just speak some details. When you have trees, an orchard, there's a certain type of plowing that you would do to benefit the trees a little bit later. It arouses, it's mo'oder the koyach of the ground. So plowing prior to Shemitah, how many days, how many weeks, it's prior. But if the kavanah of that plowing is to benefit that which will grow later, that may not even be done, even though you're doing it out of Shemitah. Like Shabbos, I can open up a light before Shabbos, even though I'm opening up the light and I'm going to use the light on Shabbos. We don't always say it. When it comes to working of the land, any avodas ha'aretz that you're doing erev Shemitah, but you're doing it to benefit that which will grow on Shemitah, is asan midoraisa. That's what Hashem is saying. That's the moisifin mechoil, verstehst, before. And the katzer shel shvi'is, hayoytzel amatzoi shvi'is, according to Rashi, if grain already reached a third of its maturity, which is a very important point by grain. It already reached a third during the 7th year. Most people don't harvest it when it's a third. They wait. Now you entered the 8th year. You would think it's the 8th year, I can do whatever I want. Since this tfuah already reached a shlish during the Shemitah year, Rashi holds, all of the restrictions of Shemitah continue, even though it's after Shemitah. You have to know how to apply it. But these are details that Rabbi Akiva learns mid the oiraisa. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel says, hold your horses. What are you talking about? The pasuk begins, Sheishes Yomim Tavid Ubayom Hashvi Tishbois. The pasuk is speaking about Shabbos. The pasuk is not speaking about Shemitah. Du hast Akashe. If the Torah is telling you examples, why give these 2 examples? Say, don't do work. Give all 39. No. There's a certain unique din regarding Shabbos that the Torah is teaching you. The Torah is comparing Charisha to Ketzira. There isn't any mitzvah that demands plowing. There is one mitzvah, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that there is a mitzvah to harvest. What's the mitzvah to harvest? Now, of course, you can argue every carbon mincha, the only way you can bring flowers by harvesting it. But you can do it whenever you want. According to Rabbi Shmuel, we bring the carbon omer on the 16th of Nisan, according to everyone. According to Rabbi Shmuel, there is a mitzvah to harvest the barley you're using tomorrow during the day, the night prior. Not 2 nights prior, not even a day prior, you have to do it then. According to Rabbi Shmuel, even if the Beis HaMikdash already harvested all of the barley they need for the carbon omer a day or 2 prior, can't use it. It has to be done the night prior. Now what's going to happen if the 15th of Nisan is Friday, which means the 16th of Nisan is Friday night Shabbos? According to Rabbi Yishmael, the Torah is telling you you have a mitzvah to reap, to be koitzer on Shabbos. The Torah says not to reap. The type of reaping that the Torah prohibits is reaping like plowing. Just like there isn't a single instance in the Torah that there is a mitzvah directly connected to plowing. So the Torah says don't plow on Shabbos. It must mean discretionary plowing, reshus, because there isn't a mitzvah. The only type of ktsira that you may not do on Shabbos, if it's like charisha, which is discretionary. In the case, according to Rabbi Yishmael, where there is a mitzvah to reap, you can do it on Shabbos. Inside. Rabbi Yishmael, no. The Torah, it's all about Shabbos. We're comparing charisha and ziriyah to tell you that ma charish, just like plowing, is always rishus. There is no single instance in the Torah that there is a direct obligation to plow. And the Torah says don't plow. Okay, in other words, don't plow means don't do something that is discretionary. The Torah is not saying don't do a mitzvah, even when it's a mitzvah. So af katzir, what type of reaping is asur? Only, this is all chitas, only a katzir, that's reshus, which is almost everything. The one case where there is a direct mitzvah to do ketzira is reaping the omer, and that overrides Shabbos. Yatza ketzir ha'omer shehu mitzvah. I want you to know that Rabbi Akiva Bachlal doesn't agree with this. Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold that you have to reap the barley the night before. According to Rabbi Akiva, whenever you see the kviyas, if the 16th is on Shabbos, reap it before. I before is Yom Tiv, always. The 15th is Pesach. We repeat before. Okay. Now, so at least we have clear, according to Rabbi Akiva, the source of the concept of Meisifim Mechol Ala Kodesh is by Shemitah and from the Pasuk and Parshas Kisitza. Amazing. How you would get from there. You see, Torah Shabbat Peh is amazing. Sheish Yisam Tavid, Obeyem Hashvi Tishbois, keep Shabbos, B'chodesh U'Bakotzer Tishbois. Don't reap and plow before Shemitah, and don't reap and plow after Shemitah. Moisifin Mechol Ala Kodesh. Now, Rabbi Yishmael, Moisifin Mechol Ala Kodesh, everyone agrees to this rule. Where does he get it from? Oh, there's another pasuk, Nafgalei Midatanya, and we're quoting a pasuk in Parshas Emor. It says, V'nisam es nafshei seichem, we should afflict our souls. We're speaking about a Gashmi Yizdika affliction. We just learned to Yuma not that long ago. Chazal defined the word affliction into 5 different things. Eating and drinking is 1. V'chulei v'chulei. So there's a mitzvah to afflict yourself on Yom Kippur. But the Torah says betisha. Tish means on the 9th day of the 7th month. We don't afflict ourselves on the 9th day. So yachol betisha. Vostake gemeint, you have to begin afflicting yourself on the 9th day. No. It says bo'erev. Bo'erev means on the 9th at the evening. The evening meaning going into the 10th. So you would think Ba'erev means that all of the obligations, we're speaking here about the negative obligations of affliction, only begins Misha Techshach. So that's why the Torah says Betisha, not Ba'asiri. Betisha means in the 9th. So what's the Pshat or Ketzat? Not that you afflict yourself the entire 9th. No. The afflictions begin on the 10th, but you have to add a little bit. There's a little bit of the time of the 9th when? A few minutes before Ben Hashmashos. Again, a little bit. You add to all of the Inuyim on the 9th, as we do. We begin fasting really before Halachic night. Even before Halachic Ben Hashmashos, because for Halachic Ben Hashmashos, since it's a suffix, whether it's day or night, you don't need to have a source. Any doubt, Midoraisa, you have to be Mahmad. But we add a few minutes to it. Many times you look at calendars and you wonder, how come the Zmanim are not aligned? That's the answer. Everyone is going beyond Shabbos. The question is, how much more do you add, or prior or post? Here we're speaking about Yom Kippur. We're going to go to Shabbos in a moment. Not the entire 9th day, but begin on the 9th. So Malamed, that's the source that Rabbi Yishmael will use, that we add from the mundane into the Kodesh. This is not Shemitah, this is not Shabbos, this is Yom Kippur, this is concerning the Inuyim of Yom Kippur. Now, Einli Ella Bichnisasai Biyitziyasai Minayin. How do you know that we also add a little bit when they blow the shofar in the shul, which by the way, the blowing of the shofar today is a minig, to remember what we will do when Mashiach comes, when we'll have Yovel, the blowing of the shofar that we're going to learn about on Amud Beis, that's Midai Raisa, but that's connected to the freeing of the slaves and other dinim of Yovel, as we'll get to in a moment. But Leremez, Lezecher, we blow the shofar. We blow the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. We blow the shofar not exactly when it's night. There's a few minutes more. How do you know we do that? Talmud Loimer, when it says Mei Erev Ad Erev, there's a general rule. Ad means until. And there's a question whether until means until and including, right? Or until and not including. Ubilil shoynenu. Ad v'lo yad b'chlal. Here ad is v'ad b'chlal. So mi be'erev ad erev. If ad v'ad b'chlal, from night until night means including the night going into the 11th. We don't fast the whole night of the 11th. It means a little bit of the 11th we're fasting. Like it says in the Hayom Yom that it comes out that we are fasting in 26 hours. We don't fast for a full 26 hours. But we entered the 26th hour because of Meisifim Mechol HaKodesh. And out of Ein Leil Yom HaKippurim, Shabbosos we don't fast. But you know, all of the dinim of Shabbos, the Isur Malach of Shabbos. How do you know that that there's also a concept of Meisifim Mechol HaKodesh, Talmud Loimer, Tishbesu. That's how the pasuk ends. It says, guys, in the pasuk, Shabbos Shabbosin hu lachem. That's an emor for Yom Kippur. V'inisam es nafshei seichem bitisha lachodesh. Ba'erev me'erev ad erev tishbesu shabbatchem. So tishbesu, which is mamash added, that's to include Shabbosos. Yomam toivim minayin. The last word in the pasuk Shabbatchem. Haketzat kol makim sheyesh boy shvus. Wherever the Torah uses the word shvus, which is really Shabbos, Yom Tiv, Yom Kippur, Shemitah, where the Torah uses the word and Yovel. In all of these cases, there is some Meisifin Mechol Ala Kodesh. Now, again, the Becharash Ubekotzir, Rabbi Akiva uses that from Yisifim Echol Al HaKodesh. Rabbi Akiva Taka doesn't hold that you can reap the Omer on Shabbos. But on the reverse, what about the Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't have this concept regarding the Inui of Yom Kippur, his only source of Mesifin is when it comes to Shemitah. So the Rabbi Akiva, he already knows Mesifin Al HaChodesh, he already knows it from Shemitah. So what does he do with this pasuk? Why does the Torah write Betisha if it's not Betisha? And Rabbi Shmuel's answer is great. No, you actually begin on the 9th. He already knows you begin on the 9th because we compare them all together. How do we compare it? The Gemara doesn't say. But since according to Rabbi Akiva we have a source by Shemitah, it's a given that we apply it also to Yom Kippur, to Shabbos, and to Yom Tov. So he has another limud. Like was taught in the Braisa, the Braisa was brought to us by Chia, the son of Rav Midifti, the Tani Chia bar Rav Midifti, when it says here, Ve'inisim es nafshi seichem betisha, you should afflict your souls on the 9th, and the kasha is, like we mentioned, V'chi betisha mesanin, v'haloi ba'asini mesanin, we fast. He's speaking only about fasting, but again, it's really all the Inuim. We fast also on the 10th. Eloloi malach. Kol, we're focusing on eating for a reason. That kol ha'oichel v'shoyse b'tshi, when you eat on the 9th, not a few minutes before Yom Tov. We're speaking about a machlekes rishonim, whether this mitzvah begins in the morning, according to some, the mitzvah begins the night before. That when you eat and drink on the 9th, mala olav hakosiv, the scripture treats him ke'ilu hisana chi vasidi, as if he fasted on the 9th and on the 10th. Now I want to speak out a few things. First of all, if you can just turn back to Daf Tes Amud Aleph, there's a very important she'iltos who sometimes had different versions, even though it's not brought over here. And he writes like this. Look, he reads like this: Elolem kol ha'oichel v'shoyse b'tshi'i u'mesane ba'asidi. Then mala olav hakosov. That's a big difference. In other words, what happens if a person ba'oinus couldn't fast on Yom Kippur? Pikuach nefesh. So then, their eating on the 9th is not as if you fasted on the 9th or on the 10th, because it's like a milsa batame. The reason why God gave me a mitzvah to eat on the 9th is in order to be able to fast on the 10th. Why is that negeya? Because many of the Rishonim ask, everyone understands this to be, or almost everyone understands this to be taka din doiraisa. There's a mitzvah doiraisa to eat on the 9th. There's one shita that says it's only an asmachta. If it's a mitzvah to eat, why don't we make a bracha? Every time you eat on the 9th, you should say, that's the betisha. And that's the answer. So the answer is because they quote the she'iltos. You don't know if you're really doing a mitzvah. The mitzvah only really happens if you taka fasted on the 10th. Now you're eating on the 9th is also a mitzvah, but you don't know yet. You can't make a bracha, you have a doubt. That's number one. Number two, there's a gewaldige Ksav Sofer, and everyone quotes him. He wants to know like this. Now that we established in Daf Tes, all Daf Tes, 2 dinim we learned. Number one is there is a mitzvah midoiraisa to add mechoil ala kodesh, which would mean that the fast does not begin by Ben Hashmashas. The fast of Yom Kippur begins a few minutes before. We just learned another limud. Let's go that it's not an asmachta, that there is a mitzvah to eat on the 9th. We hold it's from the morning. There were people that had a candy in their mouth the whole day. They're doing a mitzvah, they're eating the whole time. What happens if they conflict each other? Which means a person was in jail. A person did not have food until 2 minutes before Ben Hashmashas. Now, he can eat. Eating is a mitzvah of kol oichel b'tshi ki'ilu hisana b'asiri. It's a mitzvah to eat. And there's a law that says you have to be moisev mechoil ala kodesh in the dinim of inuyim. Which one will trump the other? B'chlal, we have a rule that esa doichel loises. This is a big, beautiful topic. Of course, if this is only an asmachta, then there's nothing to talk about. But if it's not an asmachta, then there's a logic to say that the mitzvah of eating on the 9th, especially if you did not eat prior, trumps the love of Misif Mechal HaKodesh. Okay. Let's begin now. Baruch Hashem, the timing is amazing. It's worth it, guys. You have to learn how to love this. To get a chumash, to get chumashim. I know that the shul has beautiful new Chumashim, but I have here the Gutnik Chumash, which to me is also beautiful and new. In the Gutnik Chumash, in the Chamishi Chumshei Torah, we are going to page 812. For everyone else, really, let's begin. We're learning Parshas Bahar. We're going to read a few psukim concerning Yovel. We're going to Perek Chav Hei, and I want to begin reading from psukim Tes, Yud, and Yud Aleph. I don't mind going from Pasuk Ches. So let me read like this. First of all, after the Torah speaks about the Mitzvah of Shemitah, okay, that's great. So if you want to just leave that up over here, so you have here 3 psukim. I'm going to read the psukim from the Chumash. First, the Torah says that the Torah speaks about counting the cycle of Shemitah 7 times. And the Tanach writes, even though you know how to make 7 times 7 is 49, the Torah writes 49. Okay. Then it says in Pasuk Tes, after you counted 49 years, that means now we're going into the 50th year. So it says like this: V'ha'avarta shoifar teruah b'chodesh hashvi. You shall blow the sounding of a teruah. We know whenever the Torah speaks about a teruah, it really means a tkiyah, then a teruah, then a tkiyah. With the question of what is a teruah, with the 3 options, either shvarim, either teruah, or both, and kimin hagenu, we do all. This is a mitzvah midoiraisa on the Beis Din on Yom Kippur of Yovel. First of all, Pasuk Tes is the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. Like we mentioned, there are 4 mitzvahs connected to Yovel. The isur of malacha on the land, with like Shemitah. The mitzvah now of blowing the shofar, going in the order. Pasuk Yud, v'kidashtem eis shnas hachamishim shana. And now we're going to go into the mitzvah of you shall proclaim freedom upon the land. Yeah. They made it famous over here in America. Now freedom specifically means that which Abe Lincoln did. You free the slaves. That's the freedom. Yovel he, tiyalachem, this Yovel he is mamash superfluous. And v'shaftem ish alachu zasei v'ish al mishpachti teshuva. Now another din, that all of the ancestral lands, either the land goes back to the original owner, different ways the Torah words it, or the original owners go back to the lands. But if I bought the land, you're the original owner, I have to relinquish it to allow you to go back. Now we have in Pasuk Yud Aleph, look how the Torah Ki'ilu repeats itself. Yovel hi shnas chamishim shana tiyalachem nachamol. We just said Yovel hi in Pasuk Yud. Yovel hi, what now? Lois Yisro v'lois Yisro sefichel. Rules regarding the prohibition of working the land. Again, it's not all work is prohibited, but there's a general restriction on working avodas ha'aretz. Now, yesterday, just to make it clear, when we learned the Braisa on Daf Ches Amud Beis, and remember the Rabbi Shmuel Benoy and the Chachamim, the Yovel Hi Shnas HaChamishim that we focused on, that's extra yesterday, was from Pasuk Yud Aleph. Because Pasuk Yud Aleph, Yovel Hi Shnas HaChamishim, it already says it in Pasuk Yud. Today, on Daf Tes Amud Beis on the top, the Braisa is going to focus on the Yovel Hi of Pasuk Yud. This is very important. You don't have to do it, but you have to do it. It's so much geschmacked when you read the psukim and you chap. There's a 3-way machlokes based on this Yovel Hi. Yovel Hi tiyalachem. Why do you have to write Yovel Hi? So the Braisa's premise is like this, my friends. The word Yovel is a inclusionary word. Yovel means no matter what, it's Yovel. It's Yovel. Like why not? Like Shabbos is Shabbos. Shemitah is Shemitah. He is an exclusionary word. That's again a given. He means it's not always Yovel. It's only Yovel if. Only Yovel if what? And if not, then what? So number one, we're not limiting the mitzvah of blowing the.
How do you define Yovel again?
Yovel means Jubilee, Baruch. Jubilee is the name of the 50th year.
Okay.
The obligation to blow the shofar is not contingent on anything. The obligation to free the slaves is not contingent on anything. The obligation of relinquishing the land is not contingent on anything. These are things that we always have to do. Again, a given. The question is, okay, another year not working the land? Not always. It's contingent on either on all the other 3 or of one of the other 3. And it's a 3-way machlokes tanoim. As we'll see. In other words, according to some tanoim, if you don't blow the shofar, then there's no prohibitions of working the land. That's the he. Well, your bezin has to blow the shofar. Just a concept. You don't free the slaves, azoi, no isser of working the land. I'm talking about this man shah yovel noi. Bisman hazeh there's no yovel b'chlal.
Take advantage of it?
We are taking advantage for a yid means trying to do a mitzvah.
Yes.
Okay, this whole Okay, like make sure do this because if he means not always, but it's a stira. Yovel means always. He means not always. So the Bryce is coming to show you which thing, whether you do it or not, it's yovel, and what other mitzvah. If you don't do this, then you don't have to do that. Okay, and you can leave. Now again, we're not focusing on pasuk Yud Aleph. That was yesterday. We're focusing, like Rabbi Shmuel says in pasuk Yud Aleph, a yovel he only yovel. It ends at the 50th. It doesn't go until Yom Kippur. That was like the yovel he of pasuk Yud Aleph. Here the question of pasuk Yud. The Torah did not have to write these words. Yovel he. So says the Baraisa, Yovel he, Tana Rabbanan Yovel he. Let's go with the Bach. In other words, the word Yovel, like we said, Yovel is a inclusionary word. Regardless, it's Yovel. That's to tell you that Af al pi shaloi shamtu. Shamtu just means to abandon. This is referring to allowing the lands to go back to their ancestral owners. And again, the way it works is that practically, if I live in your house, I have to leave it. That's Shemitah. I have to abandon it. So even if people are not fulfilling this obligation, which is bad, doesn't matter. The isur of working the lands are there regardless. That's yovel, no matter what. Even if the shofar is not blown and based in, the isur of working the lands, which is on pasuk Yud Aleph, right at the end of pasuk Yud Aleph, is there regardless. Lo yisizra'u v'lo yisiktsiru, and all the other details that includes. But says the first Tana of this Braisa, Yochel, you might think that if the people, for some reason, did not release their slaves, you'll say, regardless, it's Yovel. That's why the Torah writes he. So there's inclusionary, there's he. He links Dafka with this. Why Dafka with this? The Gemara is going to ask. You know when it's Yovel? If you freed your slaves. If you proclaimed freedom. If you chose not to proclaim freedom, there's no chalois of the isur of working the land. And like Yakir is saying, and therefore people who want to keep the Torah will dafka now free the slaves because it's a lose-lose. If I'll appreciate that if I don't free the slaves, not only am I losing that mitzvah, I'm losing the other mitzvah. Very important detail. Who has to free the slaves? It's not incumbent on Pan Beis Din. It's on individuals. Which means that if one individual doesn't free his or her slave, the whole Jewish people don't keep yovel. They lose the mitzvah of not working the land. That's the koyach that a yid has.
Yovel is all about the mitzvah of not working the land.
Yovel is four mitzvahs.
You're focusing on that.
We're focusing on this. Yeah. Now, how do we get there? Shlomi is not so pashut, but then we got here. Let's just begin with that premise. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. So again, it's very important to understand that the sounding of the shofar, the obligation of allowing lands to go back to their ancestors, is standalone. It means even if they didn't proclaim freedom, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore there's no isur on doing avodah sa'aretz, there is still an obligation to allow the fields to go back. That is unnegotiable. The question, the contingency, the question mark is on the isur of avodah sa'aretz. There are three other dinim. Rabbi Yehuda, the he of pasuk Yud, is linking it with ukurasam deror. Now, Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi Yomer, that's opinion number 2. Yovel, he, same premise. Yovel is inclusionary. It's always Yovel. Like, why would it not be? Like, Shabbos is Shabbos. Where do we have such a thing? We don't have anywhere such a thing. If a person, God forbid, breaks one malach on Shabbos, what? So there's no Shabbos? No such a thing. But no. The Yovel taka means says Yovel. The he, the one extra word God was maramis, Hashem hinted with the he of pasuk Yud, not of pasuk Yud Aleph. The he of pasuk Yud Aleph, Hashem had in mind that it doesn't go into the 51st year. It's only on the 50th year. It's the he goes on Shnas HaChamish. But this he, af al pi shaloi shamtu, first he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that even if the fields were not abandoned, still it's Yovel, you can't work the land. And Even if they did not proclaim freedom, no, so what? You can't work the land. But Yochel, you would think, says Rabbi Yossi, they didn't blow the shofar, still Yovel is Yovel. No, this is Zoisloi. That's the he. It limits. If the shofar wasn't blown, boom, then Yovel is not completely Yovel. It's not a bona fide Kedushas Yovel. Again, there's some Yovel, but not full Yovel. The Isur of working the land will not take effect. Now, Frek the Gemara.
The landlords also cannot claim their land.
They could. They could. The claiming the lands is not contingent. Okay. Now, Vechima Achar Frek the Gemara. So you have two. So far, by the way, we only have two shitas. We'll have a third sheet in a few lines. But both of them have an agreement. They understand that both words are extra. Yovel, he is extra. They both agree that Yovel is inclusionary, he is exclusionary. Now you have to decide what will you include, what will you exclude. So what's the logic behind this machlekes? So the Gemara is beginning to ask on Rabbi Yossi, which is very logical. His answer is very logical. So the Gemara is saying, Rabbi Yossi is saying, Rabbi Yossi is explaining himself. Why do I, Rabbi Yossi, say that Yovel, even though there was no freedom, Shaluach Havadim, Ve'ein Yovel Elam Kein Taku, but if you don't blow the shofar, there's no full din of Yovel, explains Rabbi Yossi. Noch two explanations. We'll see why he needs to have two. Number one, there's a possibility that no one in Israel will own a slave. Abe Lincoln took care of that. So how can it be that there is a part of Yovel that depends on something that we might not be able to do? What happens if no one has a slave to free? But it can be that the world won't have a shofar. So if Hashem is linking, you can only fulfill one part of the mitzvah. If you do another mitzvah, Hashem has to always afford us the ability to do that, because we want to do mitzvahs. So it's much more logical to link it to something that we always have in our ability to do. And for some reason this logic is not full. The Gemara will explain why. So Rabbi Yossi gave another logic. Davar acher, I'll tell you another reason. Who blows the shofar? Beis Din. Zu Mesurah leBeis Din. Who has to free their slaves? Every individual, if he or she owns a Jewish slave. V'zu ein Mesurah leBeis Din. So therefore it's a lot more reasonable not to make Yovel depend on a Yachid, like we explained. It gives too much power, but just because one individual broke what God said, so none of the Jewish people can fulfill the mitzvah of Yovel. We want to fulfill Yovel. It's a lot more logical to make it contingent on a Beis Din than on a Yachid. Now, why did Rabbi Yossi, the Gemara, now this is the Gemara, why did Rabbi Yossi have to give two reasons? The first reason was very, very logical. It's shaykh that no one will have a slave. So the Gemara says, you can counter-argue, this is so important, the only mitzvah of Yovel that is also a mitzvah on all of the Jewish people all around the world, the land going back to the ancestral owners is only for the Holy Land. The prohibition to work the land is only in the Holy Land. The Beis Din that's qualified to blow the shofar Sanhedrin is only in the Holy Land. But the mitzvah freeing the slaves is for any Jew in the world. So you're telling me that there isn't a single Jew in the world that owns a slave? Nah. That's why Rabbi Yossi felt, I'll give you another reason. So the reason number two is,
Jewish slave. How many Jewish slaves were there?
Danny, we live after Abraham Lincoln, we should give him credit. There was a different world then. No one will have a slave.
My wife would disagree.
All right, very good. So I'm with you. So Mesurah leBeis Din, I think women are not obligated to keep this part of Yovel because it's a time-bound mitzvah. They don't have to free us. We're stuck in a good way. So Mesurah leBeis Din, Mesurah leBeis Din. That was, he gave a second reason. Now that we explained Rabbi Yossi is so logical. What's Rabbi Yehuda? So think about it. Bishleim Rabbi Yossi k'amar time, he gave two tamim. Elul Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, what he gave was so rational. You're making a whole mitzvah of Yovel dependent on a yachid, which he does. Where did he get it from? That's why if you have a chumash open, it's going to be simple to chap. The word he is written in pasuk Yud. We're not looking in Yud Aleph. Look at what's written immediately prior to Yovel he. Whoever has a chumash. It says ukurasam d'roid ba'aretz. Kurasam Darar Ba'aretz is written right before Yovel Hi. Where do we have blowing the shofar? In Pasuk Tes. So you're darshaning an exclusionary word. You're darshaning a word. He holds that when you darshan, you can only use a exclusionary word for that which it says immediately prior. It's called Mikra Nidrash Lefanov. Veloi Lifnei Fanov. Forget about logic. Who cares about logic? Look what it says in the Torah. You're trying to limit something, so connect it to that which is written right before. According to Rabbi Yossi, he's skipping before and he's going to lifnei fanav. That doesn't fit. The words, in other words, do you follow, is the emphasis on logic or is the emphasis on scripture? Beautiful. Mikra nidrash lefanav. Any drasha that you make that's shedding light on the topic makes sense. It should shed light on that which is written right before the exclusionary word. However, v'loi lifnei fanav. Because you're skipping, according to Rabbi Yossi and according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's only contingent on one. So of course link it to that which is written prior and not to that which is written prior to prior. Now, before we go on, the kula alma droir, because when it says kurasam droir ba'aretz, the Torah doesn't write in Pasuk Yud, send your slaves away. We are interpreting the word droir as freedom. You shall proclaim freedom upon the land. How do you know that droir is cherus? My mashma. So the Tanya, no, ain't droid el lashon cherus. Personal freedom. And why is it called droid? We're going to have a nigla definition of freedom. This is very deep. El Marav Yehuda, my lashon droid. The word droid comes kedemedayer bei dayara, one who dwells in any dwelling place. And the word droid, freedom, is freedom of movement where you will live. And you have freedom to transport merchandise to anywhere you want. Which means, this is gavaldik, that how do you know if a society is becoming less free? If they are imposing restrictions as to where you can live, and they are putting restrictions with whom you can do business. It's amazing that the nations of the world that up until the moment before Mashiach are fighting against the freedom of the Jewish people. Today, Jews have restrictions where they can live. I'm not talking about in Europe that we couldn't have lived in the majority of the locations. Today in Eretz Yisrael, you can live in a certain area. You cannot live there. Whether it's legally or whether it's because you'll get killed there. And the whole BDS movement and all our other enemies, Yamach Shemam, that they're trying to restrict who we can do commerce with. Because that they intuitively know that they can't tolerate that a Yid is free. God gifted freedom to everyone, beginning with us when he took us out of Mitzrayim. So freedom, how am I free? If I can live wherever I want. If I can do business, if there's no limitations on my selling merchandise, that's pshat, I'm free. Gavaldik. Now, the Atkan to Tanoim. Now we're going to learn a third Tana, a third Shita, regarding the He. You know what the third Tana says? You only are limited. The Isur of Asiyas Avodas HaKarka is only if you did all three. Only if you did all three. You have to have the Beis Din blowing the shofar. You have to have the people relinquishing their lands. You have to have all the Jewish people giving back their avodim, freeing their slaves. Amar Rabbi Yechanan bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, yeah, you know this brisa, but let's add something else. At kanzu divrei Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Avol chachamim remim. There is a third opinion that shloshtan ma'akvos boy. There's going to be a big problem now, because if all three are needed, then he, you explained. But we began the brisa by saying that the word yovel means inclusionary. No matter what, it's yovel. According to him, it's no matter nothing. We'll get to that in a moment. What's the three? Why does that? Because these chachamim hold that mikra nidrash lefanav v'lifnei fanav ula'achrav. No, when the Torah uses the word he, and you are using it to shed light, he is an exclusion, limiting. It sheds light on the pasuk before, on the one before, and the one afterwards. As we read the psukim, that covers all three. The problem is, I v'haksiv yovel. Yovel, as we said, is an inclusionary word. So, regardless, how is it regardless? So, answers the Gemara, regardless means that the rules of Yovel are everywhere, even on Chutz La'aretz. Hahu, the afilu b'chutz la'aretz. Now, when we say afilu b'chutz la'aretz, Just to make it clear, we are only speaking about the obligation of freeing one's slaves. Now, how can you say even that? It says, Ba'aretz. The Torah writes in Bahar that Yovel is in the land of Israel. So here explains the Gemara. Hahu bizman shenoyik drar ba'aretz. Listen to the words of Tosfos. If no one has a slave in Israel to free, the obligation of freeing slaves still goes on chutz la'aretz. If there is a Jew in LA that has a slave, even though no one de facto freed a slave in Israel, no one had a slave. If there was even only one Jew that owned a slave and did not free it in Yovel, as he should have, then that stops. Then only ba'aretz.
But how the Israeli community will
You don't know that. You don't know that.
So how do they declare freedom?
Everyone should do their part. Everyone should declare freedom. If it came out that one Jew, Nebuch, didn't listen to what God wanted, and then we discovered that Nebuch, another Jew in Israel, didn't do it, then who violated? The one in Israel, not the one in Chutz La'aretz. So we're linking the obligation b'chutz la'aretz to the obligation ba'aretz. Bizman shenoig d'roir ba'aretz. If everyone who owns slaves free them in the Holy Land, then that's the ba'aretz. It depends on the aretz. Then like b'chutz la'aretz. But bizman she'eino noig ba'aretz, bizman she'eino noig ba'aretz doesn't mean that no one freed the slaves because no one owned slaves. No. If someone broke what they should have done, they owned a slave, but they didn't free a slave, even according to the Chachamim, then eino noig b'chutz la'aretz. Or let me word it differently. If two chavedim, each one owns slaves, one lives in Israel and one doesn't, if the one b'chutz la'aretz knows that his chaver in Eretz Yisrael did not free a slave, he should get on his case. He should tell him, hey, you got to free your slave. If not, you're taking away my mitzvah. Okay. Atkan, then he's looking at me. Okay. Atkan.
Israeli community.
Atkan, the sugya of Yovel. And now, let's at least begin. This is such...
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
All these opinions that we learned just now today, are they in conflict with what we learned yesterday? I think it was Rabbi Shmuel, who said that Yovel comes in with Rosh Hashana. Does he have a different opinion than these opinions that we learned today?
Not related at all, Danny, because yesterday again we were focusing on Pasuk Yud Aleph, that on Pasuk Yud Aleph it says again Yovel he. And Rabbi Shmuel says, only the 50th, not until the 51st. Okay, or the Chachamim say Yovel he, meaning the 50th year is only counted as the 50th year. It's not counted also as year number one. It has nothing to do with the topic today. Today we were focusing on the words Yovel he of Pasuk Yud.
So you might need all these factors, the shayfer and the
Yeah.
But he says you start by Rosh Hashana.
Whenever it starts, yeah. The question is, when does it start? So even proclaiming freedom, that was the machlekes. Very good. That Rabbi Shmuel holds you proclaim freedom on Rosh Hashana, but the slaves don't leave yet. There's like a quasi freedom, and the Chachamim hold no, that they have to work for you until Yom Kippur. But on Yom Kippur, boom, the Beis Din blows the shofar, and then they are freed. Okay. So Chavre Daf Tesamid Beis, we're up to the two dots. The Mishnah says on Daf Beis that Echad B'Tishrei, amongst other things, is the beginning of the year, Vila Netia, 4 saplings. Now I just want to say right away that there is a tree and there's a sapling, and that makes a big difference. I'm quoting Rashi. Sapling means a baby tree. When you plant either a seed, or if you plant a little tree, that's called your Neiteya. That's called planting something little. And it makes a big difference. The Torah tells us in Parshas Kedoshim that, and by the way, Arla is noyeg bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz, that when you plant a new tree, that shalish shanim, that for 3 years, if the tree gives fruit, you begin counting it from more or less when you plant it, as we'll see. Many trees b'chlal don't give fruit during the earlier years. But if there is produce from that tree, there's a product, there's fruit, the Torah calls that arla. Let's translate the word arla as forbidden. It's a very high level of isur. It's not only usur to consume, it's even usur to benefit, which basically means we don't do anything. We don't even harvest it. What are you going to do with it? You can't give it. You can't even give it to someone as a gift. That's also benefit. Because when I do you a gift, then you feel beholden to me. I'm using the arla fruit. You have to leave it. Everywhere. When you go today to a supermarket and you buy fruits, you don't have to be concerned that maybe this is an arla fruit because it was nullified. because the vast majority, Arla is bottle 1 in 200, and you don't have to suspect that this is Arla. Now, Kevin is excited over here. Okay, very good. Here we have a sapling. So let's begin. Minalan meaning that we have to keep Arla. It says in Parshas Kedoshim. How do you know that Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashana? And we'll explain what that means in much more detail. And it's complicated in a fun way. Listen, not so pashut. Says the Gemara D'chsiv, when it says in Parshas Kedoshim that shalosh shanim arelim, that for the first 3 years, if, again, I'm adding the word if because many times there's nothing growing, but if there's fruit, it's called arelim. Let's type forbidden. It's a good translation. And it also says, now the next pasuk is only in the Holy Land, that even after you finished with the 3 years, however they ended, when you go further in the Holy Land, all of the produce, if there's fruits that grow on the halachic 4th year, can also not be eaten stam the way you want to eat produce. It's more or less like Ma'aser Sheni, which means either you have to take that itself to Yerushalayim and only eat it there, or like Ma'aser Sheni, you are allowed to sell it on money. The money has to be taken to Yerushalayim, and you have to use the money only to buy food and drink. Okay, and it says also, now you have the word shanim in Arla, shalish shanim. And even on Reva'i, ubishnas horavi'is, again, ubishnas, on the 4th year, etc., the fruit is sanctified. Oh, so now, says the Gemara, v'yalav shana shana b'tishrei. We already had this yesterday. So how do you know it's echad b'tishrei? Have a gzeira shav. It says in Eikev, Meresh Shana. We already know Meresh Shana v'dachar Shana. We first echad b'tishrei. We already proved that. That's the Yom Hadin from Tikva Chodesh Sheva Mishpat L'Lekei Yaakov. So just like Rosh Hashana, we have another time the Torah uses the word Shana, but that's referring to Nisan. Same question. Ligmar Shana Shana Nisan, as it says in Parshas Boy, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chadshei Hashana. So here again, the answer is that when you make a Gzeira Shava, and you have 2 options, you compare it to that which is more similar, not to which it is less similar to. So the pasuk of Nisan has both the word Chachim, right, L'Chadshei Hashana, and the word Shana. The pasuk in Eikev doesn't mention the word Chodesh. In the parsha of Arla, there's no mention Chodesh. So Danin, Shanin, She'enim Echadashin, Mishana She'enim Echadashin, because they are more similar. Ve'ein Danin, Shana She'enim Echadashin, Mishana She'enim Echadashin. It's more similar. Now let's begin applying the rules. So Tana Rabbanan, we're quoting a Tosefta in Shvi'is. There's a whole Masechta Shvi'is. So first of all, when we speak about planting a tree, we have to begin by saying all of the rules of Arla is all by Noiteya. Noiteya means you plant either a seed or Kevin's picture. If you planted a sapling, just to add this detail because it's very negei lamaisa, if I already had a tree in my backyard and I uprooted it and I planted it in your backyard, or today when you buy from your gardener, he doesn't plant a seed, he already brings a little tree, a sapling, a little tree. So you should know like this, that if, these are the words, if when he removed the tree from the land in the original place, he removed it with so much earth around it that none of the roots are exposed to the air, then the moving of the tree doesn't change anything. The count is from when you originally planted it. But if there was less earth, there was some exposure of the roots, then when you replant it, you begin again. So you're beginning now. So when you plant a sapling, or mavrich, Hasidus, bracham miloshan hamshach is from mavrich. Mavrich means either to bend or to layer. Mavrich means like this. This is done a lot when it comes to vineyards. When you have a vine, the whole vine is very weak, it doesn't stand up by its own. So there were times that you take the edge of the vine, the end of the vine, you bend it and put it into the ground. That edge becomes now the root. It begins to take root, and then you cut it off. And it becomes its own vine. You can do it sometimes with fruit trees, that if there's a low branch, you bend it down, you mavrich it, you put it into the ground, that branch will become its own tree. So even though the original tree was planted 20 years ago, if you're mavrich it, and it took root, we consider this a new planting. And the third is called markev, means grafting. Grafting is much simpler. When you have a branch that you cut off tree aleph, and you know how to put it into tree base. Tree base could have been old 20 years old, but this branch is freshly grafted. So first of all of the dinim that you have to first wait 3 years goes to all three. That's the last we'll mention this right now. And we're going to just give the first example of planting, which is the simplest. When you plant, wait 3 years. So says the Braisa. So what did the Mishnah tell you? That when do you go from year 1 to year 2? So let's say today's Tesmar Cheshvan, right? So if you plant a tree today, don't say, when you finish the year number 1, next year Chesmar Cheshvan. You don't say that. We're saying Echad B'Tishrei. Echad B'Tishrei, you go over from year 1 into year number 2. Now, how much earlier to Echad B'Tishrei must you plant it for you to be allowed to say, now that it's Echad B'Tishrei, you entered another year? Don't think you can plant it Chav Tes Elul. There are 2 dinim. One, we're going to say by heart, and we'll continue tomorrow. One is written here. Din number 1 that this Braisa is not even mentioning. When you put something into the ground, until it takes root, what you did has no halachic significance. How long does it take for something to take root? We'll speak about that tomorrow. Machlokes. Whether it's 30 days, let's go with one opinion, 30 days. So first of all, just when you're planting a netiyah, planting a sapling, doesn't mean you put it into the ground. Doesn't mean you bend, you layered. Doesn't mean when you grafted it. It means 30 days afterwards. That's day number 1. First, you need 30 days for it to take root. Number 2. When we say that Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashana, so you can say it's number 2. If it was already here, 30 days after it took root. If it didn't even have 30 days, that means that I planted it in the ground according to what we're saying now. If we're saying that it takes 30 days to take root, if I planted it in the ground Tu B'Av, Tu Menachem, so it took 30 days for it to take root, that's Tezvav Elul. From then until Tishrei, there's only 2 weeks, according to what we're saying right now. Then Tishrei doesn't begin year number 2. When is Echad B'Tishrei, Rosh Hashana, if it was already rooted for 30 days? Not for a chodesh, for 30 days. I'm saying that because some Chadashim don't have 30 days.
In case it didn't took 30 days, it didn't have 30
then the year number 2 is only next year.
It's going to be 3 and
We'll get there. We're not ending it. Well, let's begin. Let's begin now. Let's read it inside. So, Erev Shvi is Shloishim Yom Lifnei Rosh Hashana. If it's not physically planted, if it took root, from when it took root, you had another 30 days. It's still a chiddush because it's only 30 days. It's only 30 days. It took root 30 days before Rosh Hashana. Then number 1 also Loishana. When Rosh Hashana comes, what year are we up to? Year number 2. When next year comes, Rosh Hashana, what year are we up to? Year number 3. Okay, we'll continue how it ends tomorrow. And then number 2, umutar l'kaiman b'shvis. It's amazing that we just learned this today. What we learned today is that there's a concept of moisifin mechoil ala kodesh. It also means that if I planted a tree within 30 days of Shemitah, again, it's not planted begashmias. If a tree took root within 30 days of Shemitah, within 30 days Shleima, you know what you have to do to that tree? You have to uproot it. So since the tree took root for a full 30 days, then you can keep it. You don't have to uproot it. And the other side, Pachus mishloishim yom lifnei Rosh Hashana, if it was within 30 days of Rosh Hashana, again, not when you put it into the ground, but if from when it took root, which is the only thing we care about, until Rosh Hashana is less than 30 days, Aleph, number 1, lo yalsa lo shana. You don't say that this Echad B'Tishrei will switch the year, but Echad B'Tishrei is going to be Rosh Hashana. You know why? Because next year it's going to switch a year, and the number 2, v'asa l'kaiman b'shvis. That's the rule, that if a tree took root within 30 days of Shemitah, there's an obligation to uproot it. You cannot keep the tree. This is the din of Echad B'Tishrei. We're beginning to learn that it only changes the year if the roots were there for 30 days or more, a lot more to be continued.